All right. So talking about QC parameters under admin QC parameters. So essentially, of course, we have a whole bunch of quality control checks in Jackalope, and most of those quality control checks have some sort of parameter that drives how they actually perform the check. So take, for example, the num hours of consecutive zeros. In an urban area, you would expect there, never to be consecutive zeros in the file. So in an urban area, you'd want to enable that check and make sure that the parameter was set to 0. 0 hours are permissible. In the rural case, for example, you may have multiple zeros throughout a day, in which case you may just want to turn the check off, or you may want to just up the thresholds a little bit, to be like 3 or 4, to allow 3 or 4 consecutive hours of zeros. And so this screen is all about customizing those, and we've done I think a pretty good job of giving you as much control as possible. First of all, you can have these checks, you can have a global value for these checks. This is a slightly different check, number of hours between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. The description is down here, what exactly it does, and specifically what it applies to. So this check will only be applied to volume data. That's applied at the count level, so the entire count is checked. Each channel is checked. So by the way, count, it could either be count level or it could be at the day level. So for short-term count that spans 3 days, this would be applied 3 times, once for each of the days, but that's not the case here. This is done at the entire count level. Each channel is checked. So if it's done at the lane level, each lane is checked. If it's done at the direction level, if it's counted at the directional level, each direction would be checked. And it applies to both short-term and continuous data, not manual data, apparently. Down here is where we have the actual, where you can set the checks. You have 6 different ways of doing this. So first of all, you can have a default value. So in this case, the default value is 3. So if you haven't overridden it, the QC will say if there's 3 hours of zeros or more, we will apply this, or we will generate a QC error on this. If you want to disable the check for the whole system, you can do that here. Normally, you might want to fine-tune this check, because part of one of the good things about Jackalope is it can make your life a whole lot easier, in the sense that you fine-tune and only get errors on data that is truly bad, and not get errors on data that is good. And the closer you can come to that ideal, the easier their life is going to be. So you can, in addition to just having a default for the entire system, you can also override by a particular month or a particular day a week. It's common in some cases to have for the percent split check. So if you've got 60% in one direction, you may flag an error. You have 6 different ways of doing this. So first of all, you can have a default value. So in this case, the default value is 3. So if you haven't overridden it, the QC will say if there's 3 hours of zeros or more, we will apply this, or we will generate a QC error on this. If you want to disable the check for the whole system, you can do that here. Normally, you might want to fine-tune this check, because part of one of the good things about Jackalope is it can make your life a whole lot easier, in the sense that you fine-tune and only get errors on data that is truly bad, and not get errors on data that is good. And the closer you can come to that ideal, the easier their life is going to be. So you can, in addition to just having a default for the entire system, you can also override by a particular month or a particular day a week. It's common in some cases to have for the percent split check. So if you've got 60% in one direction, you may flag an error. Well, in Santa Fe, for example, going up to the ski basin, everybody goes up to the ski basin on Friday and down from the ski basin on Sunday. And so basically it would always exceed that threshold on Friday and Sundays. So you could, in that case, create a check that is specific to Fridays. Or you can even go drill down further and say January Fridays, because the ski basin isn't open in the summer. So you can add another one. I'm just going to say in January, we're going to say the maximum value is 5. Okay, and so now there are two values that can be applied. By default, it'll be 3, but unless the count is in January, in which case it'll be 5. You can also have site group overrides, and most people will probably have low volume site groups, high volume site groups, and probably partition their sites based on that using smart site groups. And so, because that's a really clean way of setting these parameters, because again, this parameter should be 0 for most urban sites, and should probably be higher for most rural sites. So let's pretend we have a urban, which we don't, but let's just pretend this test was actually urban. We could add it, and you could add values to that. It looks like there were already values in here for this. That's strange. And each of these could have different values. And you can also just do at an individual site and just override the results for an individual site. But most people do it by site group. It's much easier to manage if you just have site group defaults and then just add or remove sites from that site group as appropriate. One other, and really the last thing that's important here, is this little checkbox down at the bottom. So essentially, let's say this is a class count, and it had 10 zeros in it, and it's in the urban area. So the way Jackalope would work with this unchecked is it would apply that check to the volume data, and that volume data would error out, and that's it. It wouldn't try to make any decisions on the class data of that. It would just be looking at the volume data. If you have this checked, on the other hand, you would apply the results of this check to all other data types. So if the volume errored out, it would also error out the class. And the reason we have that is that's not always the case. For example, let's say in the class you have this check. The ratio of classes 8 plus 9 to class 2. So that's trying to determine if your class counts are coming in good. Let's say this is totally whacked out and it gets the error. Well, the class might be bad, but maybe the volume is just fine. The number of cars, the number of vehicles crossing that sensor, might just be perfect, but it's just the class that's messed up. So in that case, you would want to not have this checked if you believe that. Let me just mention one more thing: error condition versus warning condition. Some of these checks like this will have an error threshold and a warning threshold both. And in that case, you would set those here. Error, it says what it does here. Error results in a no ADT note. So without user intervention, that data will not be used downstream. Warning, on the other hand, just results in a note that doesn't have any flags associated with it. So it's descriptive. You'll see it in your QC parameter thing, or your QC operator message pane. It'll be there. You don't really have to do anything about it, but it's just telling you this isn't a warning. So